Hello, it's Andrew Huang. Last week I talked about how music often follows somewhat logical, story-like patterns, and with that in mind I shared half a melody that I invited you to finish composing. Where does it go now? There were 147 usable submissions, and I say usable because there were a few people who maybe misunderstood the challenge and only sent me chords with no melody. There were also a couple people who sent me password-protected videos and no passwords. If you want to share what you came up with, or if you didn't write something yet but you still want to, link it on Twitter. Someone started the hashtag chord story, so include that and jump in, check out other melodies, talk to people. I think this could be really fun. I was gonna say, I don't know why they didn't make the hashtag melody story, but I just searched that and it seems like that is a person. So my original idea was to just talk about different ways to approach finishing a melody when you're stuck. But I realized with all these submissions, we essentially have a database of 147 solutions that people came up with for this unfinished melody. So as I was listening, I tagged 20 possible attributes that these melody continuations might have. Here they are in a nice Google spreadsheet where I have checked off which ones apply to each entry. It's kind of like you were all voting on the best methods to use, and I feel like I've been hearing a lot about voting lately, how it's important or something. So good job, everybody. Let's get a caveat out of the way. We were only working with one melody, so it's very likely that it was suggesting or favoring certain approaches that another one might not. But I think what we're going to learn today is still really valuable, and with those 20 attributes I mentioned, I was trying to keep in mind things that you could apply with pretty much any song you might be working on. The first bunch of them have to do with phrasing, the structure of a melody. My melody had a very clear sequence. You can see the shape of it when it's written out. For those of you who don't know, in music, when we talk about a sequence, we're referring to a melodic pattern that is repeated but with different notes. So the most famous sequence in the world is probably in my spreadsheet, though, I'm using the term sequence a little bit more loosely because while a lot of the submissions didn't follow the exact same shape as my melody, many of them continued to use the same rhythm or a variation on that rhythm, which is a very natural thing to do. 15% of people kept the exact same rhythm for the remainder of their melody. For example, .4% abandoned the sequence altogether and came up with something completely new for their second half. Almost exactly half of the submissions were a variation on the sequence, and I broke that down into two categories. 6% created a variation that removed notes. By far the most popular approach, 43.5% of submissions created a variation on the rhythmic sequence that added a few extra notes. Now let's look at the overall phrase. I felt that my melody was pretty suggestive of being exactly half finished in terms of length, and a lot of people felt the same way. 79% of submissions took my 4-bar melody and completed it in another 4 bars.
All right.
17.7% extended the second section, which is also a fairly natural thing to do. It can add an extra little bit of finality.
Travel down the open road. I don't know which way I should go. Oh, but I know I'll be just fine. How long should I wait for blue skies to remain? How long should I wait for rain?
Only 3.4% of people created a shorter resolution to the melody, and I think that makes sense. It's not a very popular approach because it usually makes it feel like it's been cut short. So let's take a look at the kinds of choices people made with their notes. I have to say, it was wonderful to experience 147 different takes on this tune. There were obviously similarities here and there, but every entry was unique. We are all beautiful snowflakes. There was one similarity I picked up on that I wanted to point out because it's fascinating to me and I think indicates, if not an absolute logic to music writing, at least some definite, naturally arising possibilities. There were 5 people, 3.5% of the entries, whose continuation of the melody, before they went on to do their own unique thing, started like this. Whoa! Also, 2 of them were named Tom. 3.5% might not seem like much, but we're talking about an identical 3 follow-up notes in this melody that these people came up with completely independently. And it makes me wonder if that proportion would stay the same in a larger sample size. Looking at the range of the melody, how high and low it goes, my original bit had a range of 13 semitones, so just over an octave. Not huge, but also not tiny. 41.5% of the melodies stayed within that range in their second half. 12% incorporated 1 or more lower notes.
I'm writing songs for Angela. I'm sure it won't take very long. Take some chords and stuff, turn them into something new and fresh, like the vegetables in the tester zoodle machine on TV.
The most popular option at nearly 50% of entries was to go up to higher notes, which makes sense. In music, like in story, we are often building towards a climax. And at 2.7%, it was very unpopular to include both higher and lower notes. Now let's talk about keys and chords. There were 14 entries that didn't have chords, they were just solo melodies, so that left 133 entries that I could analyze. A third of those included a modulation, so the chords and melody went to a new key, usually temporarily. I don't know how much I can pull from this because we're getting into more nebulous musical territory where people modulated to different places or different numbers of times or for different amounts of time. What I will say is that to have a third of the melodies include a modulation seems on the high side to me, and I might chalk that up to this being a mass melody writing experiment for a nerdy music channel. It might have attracted more adventurous writers or maybe inadvertently encouraged people to flex their chops a bit. That said, the majority of submissions, 2/3, included no modulation. I'll point out one more harmonic possibility which only 3 submissions used, and that is what is known as the Picardy third. Most people resolve their melodies in key, which is of course the most natural thing to do. The Picardy third happens when you sound like you're gonna resolve on the relative minor, but you take the third in that minor chord and raise it half a step, making it major. So the resolution sounds like this. It has this sort of majestic, triumphant quality to it because you're expecting this sad ending, but right at the last minute, it's totally overcome, no problem, everything's right with the world. And it just so happens that I used it when I was finishing my melody. So if you run my melody through the spreadsheet, it used an extended phrase length. It discarded the original sequence, although it hinted at it toward the end. It stayed in the same range of notes, and it ended with a Picardy third. Also, I wouldn't say that I modulated, but like the first half of the melody, and like many of you did, I used a lot of secondary dominance, so it's a bit of a gray area. I feel like I could go on a whole tangent about secondary dominance, but I will save that for another video. So what did we learn today? It would appear, according to all this information, that the most logical, or at least the most popular way to complete this melody was to create a slightly more complex variation on the original rhythmic sequence, keep the phrase length the same, reach for a higher note in the second half, and never modulate. There you go, that's the formula. Is that helpful or just super vague / obvious? I've never really looked at this many melodic writing techniques all together. For me as a writer, a lot of the times these things aren't conscious. I'm usually just feeling my way around, and sometimes that works great. But when you need them, I think it's really awesome that through this project and your contributions, we've kind of put a name to and done a very brief study of some of the most basic tools. As usual, I would love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. It was a real joy to listen to all your creativity, your voices, everything you came up with, so thank you to everybody who contributed. I'm gonna leave you with a couple amazing examples of one final writing technique, which I'm calling the non sequitur, where your song takes a complete turn into something no one could ever expect or predict. Thanks for watching, bye!